Yes, I'm sorry.
Well, good morning, Matt.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Hey.
You've got an hour and a half, so if we can do around an hour for your presentation, an hour, hour and 10, hour and 15 for your presentation, and then we can leave the rest for questions. So try and work to that kind of schedule.
All right.
Yeah, you are our first keynote speaker of the event. So take it away. But if you could just give us a quick introduction before you do the presentation. Thank you.
All right. Can you see my screen? My
We can,
presentation?
yes, we
All right.
can.
Sounds good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And so I've got the job of keeping you guys awake after lunch. All right. But anyways, I'm glad to be here and thank you for the invitation. My name is Matt Douthit. I am an audio visual specialist. I live in Dallas. I've lived in Dallas all my life. I got interested into the Kennedy assassination in 2008 when I was 12 years old. Originally, I got involved in the complex medical evidence aspect, but it wasn't until quite a few years ago, maybe 6 years ago, that I watched the late Larry Ray Harris's, who was the world's leading authority on the Tippit murder. I watched a presentation that he did at the 1994 Ask Conference, and I was just stunned at how much I did not even know about the basic facts of the Tippit murder. And my presentation today is called the Other Murder, 60 plus years later. All right. So there was another murder that day on November 22nd, 1963, about 45 minutes after the assassination, a few miles away from Dealey Plaza in Oak Cliff, suburb of Dallas. Police officer J.D. Tippit was murdered right by his patrol car on 10th Street. And the gunman disappeared around the corner, went to Jefferson Boulevard, which is the central business district of Oak Cliff, the main shopping strip in that part of the city. Shortly while afterwards, this is a suspect that the police picked up that day in a movie theater on Jefferson Boulevard, Texas Theater. And this picture of them hauling him out. He would later be identified as Lee Harvey Oswald. And as they were dragging him away, he was reported to have said, "Well, I've got me a president and a cop, and I should have got me two more." And this was circulated all throughout the newspapers and the radio that day. Seems like an open and shut case, right? Well, it turns out that turned out to be what we now call fake news. No, Lee Harvey Oswald never said that. And this is them hauling him out of the Texas Theater. And very interestingly, that very day, that full day and almost that full weekend, it was reported that Officer Tippit was killed in the Texas Theater. The story for most of that weekend was that the cops cornered Oswald in the Texas Theater, and Oswald fired at them and struck Officer Tippit and killed him. No, that actually turned out to be also what we call fake news. And like I said, Officer Tippit was killed in a residential neighborhood on Patton Avenue and 10th Street in Oak Cliff, as I said, by his patrol car. And unfortunately, 2 days after the assassinations, he was killed on live TV in front of millions of people. And the Tippit case was dropped. And that's not me saying it. That's District Attorney Henry Wade saying it. This is a quote from him, 1992, saying the Tippit case was dropped because Oswald himself had been killed. Officer Tippit was given a hero's funeral, and I actually got a copy of the videotape that from his funeral, and this is what the Reverend said at J.D. Tippit's funeral. Quote, "Today we are mourning the passing of a devoted public servant, We're mourning the passing of a faithful father and a beloved husband, an asset to his community, a beloved member of this church. Today, the life that Brother Tippit has lived has indeed preached his funeral. He had lived a noble life of service to his country, to his state, to his city, and his community. He was doing his duty when he was taken from us by the fatal bullet of a poor, confused, misguided, ungodly assassin, as was the president of our United States. Today, our hearts are indeed burdened and saddened by this occasion as we come to pay our last respects to this, our beloved brother. And Officer Tippit was buried and he was put in the ground. And that seemed to be the whole end of it until this woman came around. I want to give a shout out to this boss lady right here, Alfreda Scobie. She was the only female Warren Commission staff member, and she ultimately did not believe in the Warren Commission's final conclusions that the suspect Lee Harvey Oswald had murdered the president and murdered this cop supposedly as he was escaping. So really, we would not have a chapter in the Warren Report had it not been. It's actually not even a chapter. It's actually a subchapter in the Warren Report about the murder of Officer Tippit. We would not really be talking about him if it weren't for her. So, sometimes it takes a woman in a big group of men to say, hey, listen up, listen. And this is a memo that she wrote to the Warren Commission Chief Counsel Rankin on May 8th of 1964. And this is 8 months after the assassination? 6 months? 6 months. And her memo said, quote, as far as I can tell, none of the areas is responsible for handling any of the background or connections of Officer Tippit. Since he has been linked to both Oswald and Ruby by various rumors, and since he was a principal figure in the events of November 22nd, I was just wondering if any investigation of him has been undertaken. Wow. So that was May 8th, and May 12th, 4 days later, the chief counsel wrote this letter to J. Edgar Hoover saying, quote, as I'm sure you are aware, this request is designed to obtain certain basic information which can be relied upon to refute unfounded allegations which have developed in the course of this investigation. What does that mean? There's no investigation has been done yet, and they're already talking about refuting this stuff. How can they refute stuff if the investigation hasn't even happened? And ultimately, as I said in the Warren Report, it wasn't even a chapter. It was just a subchapter, a couple pages long, devoted to the Tippit killing. And the lead detective even said, in reality, Tippit's death was completely removed from the president's ordeal, from the president's deal. And so he literally came out and said that. And Henry Wade went even further. He said, we never worked any on Tippit's murder. Well, okay. At least he's being honest, but that is absolutely insane. And, just to go back to the funeral for a second, J.D. Tippit's funeral, I don't think a lot of people know this, there wasn't even a flag given to his widow, which is common for when a veteran dies and when a fallen police officer dies. And there wasn't even a 21 gun salute. Again, it's common for when a fallen officer is killed in the line of duty. I mean, this is a brother officer, and literally after he was buried, this thing was just swept under the rug, poorly investigated. And that's why the late researcher Larry Ray Harris said, quote, the Tippit murder has been virtually regulated to footnote status in history. And that is what it is, unfortunately. Even today, you go to Dealey Plaza on the left, and you see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And you go over to Oak Cliff to the scene of the Tippit murder. There's, 1, 2, 3, 4 people. I mean, that's not right. That's really not right. Again, it wasn't properly investigated. People don't talk about it to this day. In fact, Assistant District Attorney William Alexander said in 1983, "We all knew the same man who killed the president had killed Tippit. We had made up our minds by the time we got there to the crime scene." Okay, so before Tippit's been pronounced dead, before they've interviewed one witness, before they know what happened, before anything is done, they're already saying we've made up our minds as to what happened. And that goes with a basic fundamental thing. You cannot start with a predetermined bias. Okay. And in all these mainstream books, they just they write in their books, President Kennedy was killed over here by an assassin, and then they go over to Oak Cliff and they say, "Oh, and Oswald's walking down the street." They just automatically assume it's Oswald and start with Oswald. This is from Jim Moore's book. Oswald had been walking northwest on Patton. Tippit pulled to the curb, stopped Oswald. This is Gerald Posner's book. Tippit saw Oswald, decided to stop Oswald. I think you guys get the picture here. He pulled up his patrol car behind Oswald. This is Dale Myers' website. Came upon 24-year-old Oswald. Vincent Bugliosi's book, Oswald. Bill O'Reilly's book, Oswald. 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 I mean, that's not right. Because if you start with Oswald, then what else could you conclude? You have to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And that's not me saying it. This goes back thousands of years. Again, this follow the evidence wherever it leads. That's what we should do. This is basic. And here's J.D. Tippit's face and plastered on the 50th anniversary of the assassination in 2013. It says right here, J.D. Tippit was shot 4 times by Oswald. And again, Oswald did not have his day in court, so there's also that. One thing I found buried deep in the Warren Commission's files, actually, is an FBI interview with Robert Oswald, Lee's older brother. And on the day of the funerals, before his brother's put in the ground, I find it interesting how he's already saying, I'll say this, as far as the policeman's death is concerned, I have no doubt that he did it, So, I'm not saying it's suspicious, but it's just odd how he's already convicting his kid brother before any details have come out, before he knows what happens. So, the conclusion comes before the investigation in this case. So, what's some of the evidence in the Tippit murder? Well, this is page 166 of the Warren Report, and this is a very convincing paragraph. And it says, quote, "At least 12 persons saw the man with the revolver in the vicinity of the Tippit crime scene at or immediately after the shooting. By the evening of November 22nd, 5 of them had identified Lee Harvey Oswald in police lineups as the man they saw. A 6th did so the next day. 3 others subsequently identified Oswald from a photograph. 2 others testified that Oswald resembled the man they had seen, and 1 witness felt he was too distant from the gunman to make a positive identification." Again, it seems open and shut. This seems like a very convincing paragraph. However, context is everything. Context is everything. And to save everyone time of reading the actual Warren Report itself, I've plugged all the names in of the 12 witnesses into this paragraph. I've retyped it and plugged all the names in right there. So they say 5 of them: Markham, Davis, Calloway, Ginyard, identified in the lineup, Scoggins identified in the lineup, and so on and so forth. So let's look at this for a second, okay? All right. So right away, L.J. Lewis, he's eliminated because it says right here that he felt he was too distant from the gunman to make a positive identification. Okay. Let's start from the top. All right. Eyewitness William Arthur Smith. Did he identify Oswald? Well, buried in the National Archives in the Warren Commission documents we find an FBI report of an interview with Smith, and it literally says, quote, Smith advised that he did not believe it was Oswald when he saw Oswald on TV. Now, this is not mentioned in the Warren report or its 26 volumes. Oops. And when he testified before the Warren Commission, this happened. Quote, Mr. Ball, now did you see Oswald on television? Smith, yes, sir. On the night of the shooting? Yes, sir. Did it appear to you to be the same man you had seen? He had lighter hair than he did when I saw him. Well, now wait a minute. You mean the man you saw on television had lighter hair? Mr. Smith, then the man you saw running away? Yes. Is that right? Yes, sir. So in the end, they could only get Smith to say that Oswald resembled the killer. So no, William Arthur Smith did not ID Oswald as the killer. And this is a photo of him taken at the crime scene shortly after when the police were taking pictures. You see this on the left. In the background of one of the crime scene photos, if you zoom in, that's him probably just half an hour after the assassination. So, all right, so Lewis and Smith are crossed off from our analysis. Let's go now to the closest witness, Donnie Benavides. Now, this has been talked about before. He was the closest eyewitness, literally just about 15 feet away. He was driving in his pickup truck, and he was almost parallel with Tippit's car. And Tippit was talking with the man who was on the sidewalk. Tippit got out of his car to approach the suspect on the sidewalk, and the man across from Tippit on the sidewalk, pulled out a gun and shoots him dead. And Donnie Benavides was almost parallel with Tippit's car, as I said, and he slammed on his brakes and pulled over to the curb and dived to the floor of his car. But he did look up and he saw the killer. And he described the killer this way: about 5'11", had a complexion a little bit darker than average, a little bit ruddier than mine. Now, he's Mexican-American, as you can see. So he said ruddier than mine, so that's important. Had dark hair that was a little bit curly, and he looked like he needed a haircut for about 2 weeks with a hairline that sort of went square instead of tapered off in the back. Now, this could not have been Oswald. Again, this is the best description of the killer given from the closest witness who's 15 feet away. I mean, just on its own, that cannot be Oswald. And during his testimony, of course, he refused to identify Oswald as the killer. Okay. So we cross Benavides off. Let's go to Harold Russell, Pat Patterson, and Mary Brock. Now, as the Warren Commission paragraph said, they were shown not a photo lineup of Oswald, but they were shown this photo, this Oswald's mugshot. They were shown a single photo of Oswald months after he was dead and nationally known. And I mean, I always say to people, I mean, that's like showing someone Osama bin Laden. I mean, does this man look familiar? The guy? Is this the guy? Do you recognize this man? Well, yeah, of course you recognize him because it's so with Russell Patterson and Mary Brock, they're automatically out the window because that's absolutely worthless. And as far as Pat Patterson is concerned, Pat Patterson actually came forward with about 4 weeks to go before the Warren Commission report was published, and he said, "I didn't identify anyone. I did not identify anybody." So the FBI agents did the right thing this time. They took a photo lineup to Pat Patterson, and they did the right thing this time and showed him a photo lineup. No, they did not do that. They did the same thing, and they showed a single photo of Oswald to him, and it wasn't even this photo. Do you guys want to see the single photo that they showed Pat Patterson?
Yes, please.
You guys ready?
Yep.
Yes.
this photo. And again, this is 9 months after the assassination. And so yep, of course I recognize that guy. Okay. So anyway, moving on. So the point is that Russell Patterson and Mary and Brock are I mean, they're automatically worthless, absolutely worthless. And the other thing to note is that this is very important. I don't think a lot of people understand this. Reports of Oswald photo identifications are not Oswald photo identifications. Okay? That's important. Now you might say, but wait, we have signed affidavits from Patterson, Brock, and Russell, right? Yeah, we have signed affidavits. They're right here in the Warren Commission volumes. Well, if we zoom in, well, unless an original turns up, which there hasn't been, we actually don't know if they signed these affidavits or not. That's all we have. So in 60 years, those have not turned up. This is all we have. And once again, they're worthless. So Russell Patterson and Mary Brock are out of the way. Let's move on to Bill Scoggins. Now automatically Scoggins is eliminated because he saw Oswald in the morning paper on Saturday before the lineup that he went to on Saturday. So automatically he's out. But let's go down this path, okay? Interestingly, I discovered that lineup participant Daniel Lujan, he testified that actually there was no Saturday lineup because once they were marched on the stage, Oswald began complaining about the unfairness of it, and the police took them all back outside and never brought them back in. So there was no lineup. It's testimony in Volume 7 of one of the lineup participants who was actually, okay? And even so, Scoggins picked the wrong photo in a photo lineup, Volume 3, page 335, and he could not ID Oswald as the killer when shown a photo by the FBI at CD 5, page 77. Warren Commission defenders have known about this for 60 years, and yet they steadfastly refuse to acknowledge it. Why? These two facts weren't in the Warren report. So, like I said, he's useless anyway. He's useless anyway because he saw Oswald in the morning paper. So we crossed off Scoggins. Let's go to Mrs. Helen Louise Markham. Okay. First of all, I'm going to approach this a little differently than how people usually do. First of all, there's no document from that day that says she identified anyone. Zero. You can't find it because it doesn't exist. So what we have to rely on is her Warren Commission testimony a couple months later. So here's what really happened, all right? After saying 7 times that she didn't recognize anyone in the lineup, and then saying 2 times that she did, Markham ended it with, quote, I wasn't sure, and they kept asking me, which one? And finally, I said number 2. End quote. That's Volume 3, page 311. That's not a lineup identification. And moreover, as usual, as low nutters and skeptics, they just outright omit all of her credibility problems. And like Scoggins, she's a worthless witness. And that's not me saying it. That was stated by the Warren Commission council members behind the scenes. They said she is a worthless witness. But yet in the Warren report, it said that she was credible. And even so, even if we take her original statement from that day from the FBI, she described the killer this way. On the day of the assassination, this wasn't published in the Warren report, the 26 volumes. This is buried in the Warren Commission document files in the National Archives. This is her original statement. She said that the killer was 18, black hair, red complexion. Does that sound like the Oswald that we know and love? Okay. All right. So basically, that leaves us down to 4 witnesses. 4 witnesses who went to a lineup and picked Oswald out. Okay. Oh, okay. There's actually a bombshell here. So it turns out that the affidavits of Calloway, Ginyard, and the Davis sisters, those four people, which identified Oswald in the lineups, were taken before they had viewed the lineups. And that's not me saying it. That is right in the volumes itself. Detective Lavelle said, quote, I called Mr. Calloway, who came down and brought Sam Ginyard with him. While waiting for the show up, I took an affidavit from both of the above men. Detective Brown said, quote, after their affidavits were taken, we took them to the lineup room, talking about Mrs. Virginia Davis and Mrs. Barbara Davis. Okay. So the following affidavits were taken before the lineups, and it says, quote, Calloway, the number 2 man in the lineup that I saw at City Hall, is the same man I saw with the gun in his hand. Ginyard, number 2 man. Barbara Davis, number 2 man, number 2 man. So I just want to point that out because I don't think I've heard a lot of people talk about this, and it's very, very important. Now, a lot has been said about the lineups over the years. The go-to line is, oh my gosh, how can you throw Lee in there with, guys in suits? Look how unfair this lineup is. Well, actually, they were not wearing suits like that. Actually, I've reconstructed how the lineups actually were based off of the testimony of the lineup participants. They each gave testimony before the Warren Commission in Volume 7, which I think a lot of people forget about. So this is how the lineups actually looked. Oswald was the number 2 man for most of the lineups. In the Friday lineups, Oswald was thrown in with 3 men in dress attire. One of them had a red vest, another had a gray knit sweater, and one had a brown sport coat. They took the tie off though, so props to them for that. Can you guys pick out the guy that's just been arrested? Anyone?
Is he in red?
You stole my joke. Yes. The guy in red? Keep trying. So, and in the Saturday lineup, which was just insane, Lee was thrown in with, you ready for it? 2 teeny boppers and a Mexican. And it is actually a picture of one of those teenagers, which was, of course, not published in the 26 volumes. No, and not only that, Oswald was also shouting out how he was innocent and being railroaded. So we got problems there. So the other 3 lineup participants from Friday, one of the guys had brown hair, dark complexion. Another guy named Clark had blonde hair, ruddy complexion, and the other guy Abels had dark hair and a ruddy complexion, and they were all taller than Oswald, by the way. So they were all taller. And this is I didn't know this until researcher Gil Jesus, pointed this out. He said, quote, as if having 1 blonde in the first 2 lineups was not enough, the Dallas police put 2 blondes in the next lineup. Both fillers Richard Walter Bortreg and Ellis Carl Brazel had blonde hair. Whew, boy. And the other thing that a lot of people forget about, I think, is that the witnesses did not view the lineup separately. Sam Ginyard and Ted Calloway viewed a lineup together. They're sitting right next to each other. Barbara Davis and Virginia Davis viewed their lineups. They were sitting next to each other, and Scoggins and the other taxi driver, Whaley, on Saturday, they were also sitting next to each other during the lineup. So the witnesses did not view the lineup separately. They all viewed them together. So this is very improper. Very interestingly, Detective Elmer Boyd even admitted under oath that they were dressed better than Oswald. So Captain Fritz therefore lied to the Warren Commission when he testified that they, quote, fixed themselves where they would look like prisoners. As researcher Gil Jesus says, prisoners don't wear red vests or brown sport coats. All right. And as I said, the men in the lineups did not even resemble Oswald. And also, this kind of gets forgotten about. The men in the lineups gave fictitious names and occupations, and Lee gave his real name and his real occupation. Details, of course, which by that time were nationally known. And I've gotten a lot of kickback. Well, first of all, the sources are right here. Volume 7, pages 234, 237, 239, 241, and 242. I'm putting all these sources here, so for you guys, so anyone can just go right to it, and I'm not, so you can see that this is true and that I'm not crazy, okay? So the kickback I've gotten from this is, well, there's no evidence that Oswald was forced to give his name and his occupation during the lineups. Only the other three men were. Well, that is actually worse. So if we go by that logic, then we are led to believe that the three lineup participants gave their names and their occupations, but Oswald did not. So that makes him stand out even more as a sore thumb. And here's some more of the evidence right here. Detective Sims testified. He asked everyone in the lineups their names and age and address, and if they own a car. So these are all the questions that they asked the people in the lineup participants, and each time they were all asked their name, occupation, name, occupation. So like I said, if you're going to go down this route of, well, there's no evidence Oswald was forced to give his name and his place of work, then that makes it worse because like I said, that would make him stand out even more like a sore thumb. Okay, we're going to ask everyone their names and their occupation except that guy. We're going to ask everyone their names. Oh, except for that guy. We're going to, so occupation except for that guy. So I don't think that's a argument that you want to make. And this is a famous quote. This is what Detective Jim Lovell told the eyewitnesses in the lineups. And I want to play this video. If you can, if it does not play, and if you can't hear it, just let me know. And I'll just read it out loud to you. This is from the London mock trial from 1986. Their defense attorney Jerry Spence is cross-examining witness Ted Calloway, and he talks about this famous quote, what he was told by Lovell. Okay, let me know if you can hear it, or let me know if you can't hear it.
I say to you, quote, the officer didn't say to you, quote, we want to be sure. We want to try to wrap him up real tight on killing this officer. We think he is the same one that shot the president. And if we can wrap him up tight on killing this officer, we have got him. Didn't they say that to you?
That is almost word to word what the Chief of Detectives Will Fritz told me, but he preceded his remark was, but be sure, take your time, get a good look at him. Do not make an identification unless you are absolutely positive.
And then after he gave you that, he said, we want to be sure, we want to try to wrap him up real tight on killing this officer. We think he's the same one that shot the president.
Right.
And if we can wrap him up tight on killing the officer, we have got him. He told you that, didn't he?
Sure did.
You think that's a fair and impartial way to make a lineup on somebody? I mean, if you were standing in the lineup, innocent, charged of a crime, and somebody said, we want to wrap him up real tight because if we can show he killed the officer, we got the man who killed the president, do you think you'd have got a fair shake?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So was everyone able to hear that?
Yeah.
All right. So, and also, notice how the police said him and not the men in the lineup. We want to try to wrap him up real tight on killing this officer. We think he is the same one that shot the president. But if we can wrap him uptight on killing this officer. We have got him. Take a good look at him. Okay. And also, I did not have time to add this into my presentation, but actually, Ted Calloway, who you just saw, he actually committed perjury at that trial, because if you continue watching the video of the mock trial, Vincent Bugliosi asked him, Mr. Calloway, were all four men in the lineup of the approximate same age, height, and weight? And Calloway says, they were. Sure. So, but this is straight up perjury, because Oswald, of course, was 24. The other men in the lineups were 34, 31, and 26. Oswald was 5'9". The men in the lineups were 5'11". And of course, Oswald was slender. And Cecil McWaters testified, quote, the rest of them were larger men. So, and one thing I did find deep in Vincent Bugliosi's CD-ROM of his book, Reclaiming History, the doorstopper, as people have called it, all the details about the Tippit case in Reclaiming History are buried deep in the CD-ROM. So I plowed through it, and very interestingly, buried deep in the endnotes, Vincent Bugliosi wrote that Detective Lavelle told him that of the lineup participants, quote, I made sure that none were wearing a suit coat. Okay, now this has to be a fib, because as we said, lineup participant Perry testified he was wearing a brown sports coat. So, and Bugliosi goes on to say that Lavelle additionally told him, quote, I definitely remember not asking any of them their names. Now, this is absolutely a fib, because as we said, here, let's pull it back up. Okay, here we go. Detective, this has to be a fib, because fib, because for the lineup participants, even Detective Sims, they all testified that the names were asked and given during the lineups. It's right there. So, yeah, there's that. All right, where were we? Okay. So despite all this, the Warren Commission said the commission is satisfied that the lineups were conducted fairly. I mean, not even Vincent Bugliosi himself buys that. He says, quote, the Tippit lineups were not fair lineups. He wouldn't say that in the main text of the book, but he buried that sentence in his CD-ROM. So he admits it. Tippit lineups were not fair lineups. One more thing on the lineups. The Dallas police wouldn't admit to rigging the lineups, would they? Would they? Let's see. Let's see. Did you guys hear that?
Can you replay that, Matt?
Sure. Did you guys hear that?
Yeah.
All right. So this is actual footage of the Saturday of them leading Oswald, and as we said, he was protesting the lineup. There's one of the teenagers right there to his right, and Oswald says, "quote I've been photographed in a T-shirt, and now they're taking me in front of a lineup among these men, and that way I'll be picked out, right?" And one of the cops says, "Yep, that's right. That's right." So again, yes, they did admit to rigging the lineup so that the witnesses would pick him out. It's right here. Let's watch that again. That's right. That's right. Okay. Actually, last thing on the lineup. This is a very interesting point that Larry Harris brought up in his article. He was writing a book on the Tippit case, and ultimately he condensed it down to, he kept the name, the title of it, but he ultimately condensed it down to an article. And if anyone wants the article, I can send it to you guys. But this is from Larry Harris's article. It says, quote, according to a Secret Service report, Oswald complained of a lineup wherein he had not been granted a request to put on a jacket similar to those worn by some of the other individuals in the lineup. Now that shows honesty, because why? If you think about it, why would Oswald want to wear a jacket if he had discarded the one he was, supposedly wearing when he shot Tippit? Does that make sense? So, like, I guess that's sort of like I'm speaking off the cuff here. I guess that would be like, let's say that there's a murderer who was wearing a rainbow jacket. And then he ditches it or whatever, and then that night he's in a lineup, and the suspect says, "Wait a minute, I need to put where's the rainbow jacket? You got to put it." So I think that shows. Does that make sense, Neil?
It does.
So
yeah.
it does. So it's like, why would he want to wear it? If he was guilty, he would not want to wear the jacket. Because if it was him, wearing the jacket, then they'd be like, "Oh yeah, that's him." Might or anyway. And by the way, I highly implore anyone to read Gil Jesus's article on the lineups called "Were the Oswald Lineups Valid?" This is the best thing that has ever been written on the lineups, in my opinion. It's from 2009. It'll blow your mind. What I read you was just kind of just the tip of the iceberg, just some highlights, but everyone read that article. It'll blow your mind. It's spellbindingly eye-opening. So, when you have Vincent Bugliosi and Lone Nutter saying things like, show me any other case where 10 eyewitnesses were wrong. Well, actually, it's not 10 witnesses, as we've said. It's really 4 witnesses. So Bugliosi's question should instead be, show me any other case where 4 eyewitnesses were wrong. Okay, easy. Okay. I can do it better. In 2012, 6 eyewitnesses misidentified a murderer. Lionel Grant was exonerated by DNA in 2020. So, there it is, Mr. Bugliosi. There it is. So, and what people like Bugliosi will never tell you is that there were 12 witnesses who refused to identify Oswald. And here are the names to that number: Donnie Benavides, Bill Smith, Warren Reynolds, L.J. Lewis, Aquila Clemens, Frank Wright, Margie Higgins, Jim Burt, Robert Brock, Francis Kenneth, Albert Austin, and an anonymous witness. So these 12 people refused to identify Oswald. Joseph McBride counted 10 in his book. I'm up to 12, so all right. And the other thing that they won't tell you is that 5 witnesses were quoted as saying that the killer was not Oswald. And that would be Aquila Clemens, Frank Wright, Margie Higgins, Jim Burt, and the anonymous witness. All right. So if it ever come to court, Jim Burt just has to get up and say, and be asked, is the man? No, no, that's not the man. Oswald walks, right? Maybe. So the Warren report only listed 12 witnesses. I've actually counted 30 witnesses, not 12. And here are the list of all 30 names. These are people who either saw the shooting, saw the gunman running away, heard shots, or heard shots. And we have 30 witnesses total. So here we go. So from my calculations, 5 said it wasn't Oswald, 7 refused to identify Oswald, 4 said it was Oswald, 4 are worthless, 2 are useless, and 3 are kind of suspect. So after the final analysis, that's what I came to conclude. And using just the usable witnesses, 75% of the eyewitnesses tell us that it's not Oswald. Not that 75% of the witnesses say it's not Oswald, but 75% of the witnesses do not say not Oswald. Only 25%. Again, those 4 witnesses. This is a chart pie graph I made. Now, I'm sure that a lot of lone nutters will read stuff like this. This is from Robert Groden's book, Absolute Proof. Robert Groden wrote, quote, "None of the witnesses to the crime itself identified Oswald as the killer of Tippit." Now, many, perhaps most, if not most, lone nutters would leap off their chairs at this seemingly eccentric comment. They might go, "Whoa, no, that's not true. That can't be true." But actually, I actually looked into it. Actually, a closer look at the evidence shows that it is true. And this surprised even me. Oh, so these are the 5 witnesses who watched it go down. Jim Burt, he told reporter Al Chapman and researcher Larry Harris that it was not Oswald. Bill Smith told the FBI he couldn't identify Oswald. Donnie Benavides testified he couldn't identify Oswald. Bill Scoggins, as we said, picked the wrong photo in a photo lineup and could not ID Oswald as the killer when he was shown a photo by the FBI. And Helen Markham, she testified she didn't identify anyone. And as I said, no report from that day does she say she identified anyone. So these are the 5 witnesses who actually saw the murder happen. So that statement is true. None of them could identify Oswald. The 5 people who saw the murder itself. And these are names to faces. At the top left is Jim Burt, and then Bill Smith, Donnie Benavides, Bill Scoggins, and Helen Markham. Again, these are the 5 witnesses who watched it go down. So basically, all the witnesses pretty much tell the same story, except for these 3 witnesses. We're not really sure. History is not really sure what to do with these 3 witnesses. We have Aquila Clemens. She famously said that there was another man across the street, and that after the shooting, the shooter and the man across the street ran off in separate directions. No one else saw this. And we got a guy by the name of Frank Wright at the top right. He said that the killer hopped in a gray car and sped away. No one else saw this. And Jack Tatum on the bottom, he testified that after the shooter fired the shots, he started to leave the crime scene, then walked back, then returned to the crime scene, stepped into the street, took careful, deliberate aim, and fired one more shot into Tippit's body. No one else saw this, and no one reports, bam, 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 and then, a 30-second pause, and then bam, another bam. No one else reports that. So Clemens didn't see what Wright saw. Wright didn't see what Clemens saw. Tatum didn't see what they saw. So we're not really sure what to do with these 3 witnesses. That's why I call them the other 3. This is a quote by Jim, going back to Jim Lavelle. He said, quote, "Well, the one thing that we didn't do that we should have done," and this is an afterthought. What I didn't, what I should have done was canvass those door to door, like I have done in other murder cases, and get the evidence. Okay. Pretty shocking. In other murder cases, he does this, but in the death of a fellow officer, he did not do that. Okay. Moving on to descriptions. Well, what did people describe that day? Excuse me. What did people describe that day on November 22nd? What did they describe of the killer that day? Let's just go by descriptions of that day. Well, at 1:22 p.m., Officer Walker announced over the radio that the Tippit suspect was, quote, a white male, about 30, 5'8", black hair, slender, wearing a white jacket, white shirt, and dark slacks. But Oswald was 24, brown hair, didn't own a white jacket, and wore a brown shirt. At 1:37 p.m., Officer Summers reported over the radio that an eyeball witness told him that the killer was, quote, a white male, 27, 5'11", 165 pounds, black wavy hair, dark trousers, and a white shirt. But Oswald was 24, 5'9", 135 pounds, brown hair, and wearing a brown shirt. Sergeant Jerry Hill, he testified, quote, the first man that came up to me, he said, quote, the man that shot him was a white male about 5'10", weighing 160 to 170 pounds, had on a jacket and a pair of trousers and brown bushy hair. But Oswald was 135 pounds and had receding hair. Officers Poe and Jez, their report from that day said that the killer was, quote, had, quote, bushy hair, wearing a brown jacket. But Oswald had receding hair and didn't own a brown jacket. And as we said before, witness Helen Markham, she told the FBI, as I said that day, 18, black hair, red complexion. This couldn't have been Oswald, for he was 24, brown hair, pale complexion. All right. And, I did a newspaper search of all the newspapers that day, and they all say, these are highlights from newspapers from around the country, went out over the word, bushy-haired man stopped by Tippit, bushy hair, bushy hair, bushy hair. So that seems to be a recurring theme. Okay, now let's talk about something new. So it took me literally 2 months in all of my spare time to compile every single witness description given by all the witnesses. And overall, it took me 2 months in my spare time to compile, but the result is pretty striking even to me. There are 120 descriptions of the Tippit killer. Now you guys might be thinking, wait a minute. Are all 30 witnesses describing him 4 different ways? No, that's not what this means. What this means is that if you take all the descriptions from all 30 witnesses of all the color shoe he was wearing, his eye color, his hair, you add, the jacket, which hand he was holding the revolver in. I've cataloged all this. Overall, there are 120 descriptions of the Tippit killer. Okay. And I've cataloged it right here. So this is a chart that I made, the descriptions of the Tippit killer. And quite 64 of those eyewitnesses descriptions 64 of those descriptions point away from Oswald, 16 are neutral, 39 favor Oswald, and one is no, invalid. So that's a 53% chance of all the descriptions that point away from Oswald. That's pretty striking. That surprised even me. And again, this took me 2 months to compile. Okay, let's use artificial intelligence. AI, it's 2025, so why not, okay? So let's take all of those 120 descriptions of the Tippit killer. Let's take every single one of them, put them into AI, and let's see what this guy looks like, okay? So that's what I did. I put all descriptions into AI. You guys ready to see what the killer looks like?
Yep.
All right, so here he is. So this is based on all the eyewitnesses, pushing everything together, every single description. This is the guy that we're after, who shot Jay Tippit.
Matt, is that Gavin McMahon's Italian guy?
I don't know.
Well, you've read Gavin McMahon's work, haven't you?
Yes. So basically, what we're looking for is the guy that we're looking for is a white male. This is mushing everything together. Basically, what all the witnesses described, all 30 witnesses, we're looking for a white male, age 18 to 25, dark, 18 to 25, dark eyes, also didn't have dark eyes, black hair, also didn't have black hair, hair type, as we said, a little bit bushy, a little bit curly, looked like he needed a haircut for about 2 weeks, And one witness even said it was brushed up in front to form a pompadour. You know, those 1960s, 1950s haircut with a, John Travolta. So AI took that into consideration. Complexion, dark and ruddy. Height, 5'11". Weight, a little heavy. White t-shirt, tan jacket, dark pants, black shoes, and holding a revolver. Now, almost all of that is not Lee Harvey Oswald. So I'm revealing this here for the first time. This is the guy that we should be looking for. Moving on to the ballistics evidence. Very interestingly, in Joseph McBride's book, Into the Nightmare, he dogmatically says, quote, no ballistics evidence links him, Oswald, to the Tippit crime scene. It's not exactly true. So I'm going to let Larry Harris take this away. Larry Harris said, quote, now in the final analysis, these four shell casings are the only tangible evidence linking Oswald's pistol, and Oswald, I suppose, to the Tippit murder. There's no question that the shells turned over to the Warren Commission were fired from Oswald's revolver. Nobody disputes that. The question is, when were those shells fired in that revolver? And the question also becomes, were those in fact the same shells found at the scene on November 22nd, which were later received by the Warren Commission? And I'm going to let Larry take it away here on the Tippit bullets. He says, quote, and the bullets, originally, the Dallas police told the FBI that they only had one bullet, and that was turned over. It was a bullet that had hit Tippit. He was shot 4 times. He was hit once in the head, 3 times in the chest. One of these bullets struck a button. There's the button right there. And it didn't really penetrate his chest. And so that bullet was turned over, and the FBI was told by the police that that was all the bullets that they had. Well, many months later, the Warren Commission sent the FBI down to Dallas and asked him to find out, what's going on here. And they found 3 additional, someone opens up a drawer, and they find 3 additional bullets in police files. Now, what was that all about? End quote. So these 3 belated bullets did not appear for 4 months. That's volume 3, page 474. So simply put, they would not have been admitted into evidence. And the bullets themselves are too mangled to be matched to any gun. So the bullets are useless. Another problem is that 3 of the bullets were Remington and 1 was Winchester. But the shells in evidence are 2 Remington and 2 Winchester. Now, the thought is that, well, maybe they could have been reloads, but not even the Warren Commission bought that. And by the way, I think this fact has been a little misunderstood. People think, oh, there's 2 different types of bullets and shells. No, it's 2 different types of brands. For those who aren't familiar with firearms, you can fire multiple different brands in a gun as long as it's the same caliber. So as long as they're all 38, you can fire it in a 38 revolver. It doesn't matter if they're different brands. But we do have this problem. Why the mix match? Now, some people think, well, maybe there were 5 shots fired instead of 4, and that 1 bullet missed, and that therefore there's 1 bullet missing, and somehow there's also 1 shell that's missing, and so that would account for the mix and match. The problem is that we look at the trajectory, apart from how can you miss when you're firing point blank range into an officer, but nonetheless, the trajectory, if a bullet had missed, leads it right into the house across the street. And the person in that house ran out, and he never said anything about, you ain't gonna believe what happened. This bullet crashed into my house. He never said anything like that. So it's totally ridiculous. And we might say, well, maybe it was the house next to it. Maybe the killer fired high and it went into another house, the house next door, maybe. Well, it turns out that the person in that house was interviewed by Joseph McBride. He never said anything about a bullet crashing in the house. This whole thing is nonsense about a bullet missing. And you have to believe that the as I said, you missed, just like in Dealey Plaza, how you miss at the closest shot, you miss point blank range firing from an officer. It's nonsense. So Joseph McBride actually said in not in his book, but in a podcast episode somewhere, he said, quote, "It's consistent with stuff being planted very clumsily." And I was like, you know what? That seems to account for why there's a mix and match here. It's consistent with stuff being planted very clumsily. And when I tell you guys, literally the only thing necessary to pin this case on Oswald is to switch out the shells. Easy. That's literally the only thing you have to do to pin this on Oswald for the Tippit murder. Just switch out the shells very easily. And the other problem is that there's just too many bullets, okay? There's way too many bullets. So 4 bullets, too many bullets and shells. So 4 bullets hit Tippit, 1 bullet supposedly missed, 1 bullet was kicked out of the ambulance and onto the hospital parking lot by ambulance attendant Eddie Kinsley. 2 shells were found in a bush by Donnie Benavides. 1 automatic shell was observed at the scene by Sergeant Hill. 2 shells were found by the Davis sisters on the side of their house. 1 shell, as they say, is supposedly missing. Oh, there's a missed shot. A missing shell. Witnesses Russell and Patterson saw the gunmen discard shells way over on Jefferson Boulevard, still discarding shells, and the Davis sisters' father-in-law kept 1 shell as a souvenir. So, just like in the Kennedy case, you put everything together. There's just too many bullets, too many shells, and it really does not make sense. It's a paradox. And also, of course, the shells are not listed on the police report, and the shells were not entered into evidence for 6 days. So really quickly to summarize this, Officer Poe affirmed he marked the first 2 shells. His initials disappeared. Sergeant Barnes testified he marked the first 2 shells. His initials apparently disappeared. The FBI belatedly claimed that Captain George Doty marked the 3rd shell. A cursive capital G is in fact on the shell today, but the problem is we don't know when he allegedly marked it. Who knows? He may have marked it later. We just don't know. It's just, that part is just hearsay. And Detective Brown testified that he and Detective Doherty marked the 4th shell. Their initials apparently disappeared. And of course, it just gets worse. The shells that are in evidence today, they could not be identified by the 3 witnesses as the ones they found that day, Benavides and the Davis sisters. I mean, you just can't make this up. It's super obvious, to me at least, that the shells were switched. And now you might say, but, the FBI claimed that Sergeant Barnes identified his marking, and Doty, yeah, it's right there, in volume 24. They claimed that they did. Well, it sounds like a slam dunk, right? Well, actually, not so fast, partner. Think again. This actually comes from, it turns out, an anonymous document, and it's just claims. That's the claim and not the evidence. When you say that these people identified their marks, that's just a claim. We've spoken to none of these witnesses or even the person who wrote that report. When you present these things as evidence like that, and the jacket fibers, as we'll see, they are just, in fact, more and more claims. It's not supported by anything. So, claims are not evidence. All right. On to a jacket now. There was a white jacket that was found that day. Everyone that day described it as a white jacket. It was even filmed of them picking it up when it was found, and it's a white jacket. But darn, what we have in evidence right now is a gray jacket. Supposedly Oswald's gray jacket. All right. And here's some higher quality images of it. There's same images, but they're higher quality. And that's the color photograph of the jacket in 1963 taken by the FBI. So there's a problem here. There's a big problem. So in a nutshell, the police found a white jacket the jacket in evidence is gray. Oswald left his house wearing a dark jacket, according to his housekeeper. The killer wore a light jacket, according to all the witnesses. The jacket in evidence is size medium, but Oswald wore size small. The jacket in evidence also bore a laundry tag, but Marina, Oswald's widow, said none of her husband's clothes ever went to any laundry. Instead, she washed them herself. And in the end, this is incredible, the FBI checked 717 laundries from Dallas to New Orleans and were unable to match the tag. Okay. Five of the six Tippit witnesses that were shown the gray jacket in evidence could not ID it. 5 of the 6 witnesses that were shown Oswald's shirt could not ID it. And Mrs. Roberts, the housekeeper who saw Oswald leaving wearing a dark shirt and dark jacket, she cannot identify the gray jacket that's in evidence now. Okay. The killer wore a light shirt and light jacket, yet Oswald was wearing a dark shirt and dark jacket, as I just said. So this is just a little sidebar. This is the in Dale Myers' book in 1998, he published the color photo from 1963 of the jacket that we looked at before on the left. And then later on his website, he published the same image, but it's lighter. I'm not accusing him of anything, but like, you know, did he make it lighter because all the Tippit witnesses said that the killer wore a light jacket? Therefore, he has to make. I don't know. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. This is just something to think about. So the next claim is that but you know, shirt fibers conclusively link Oswald to the crime. Well, again, not so fast, because once again, just like with that claim from the anonymous document about that we talked about, out of the millions of pages in the National Archives, only a single page claims this. It's right there. Wasn't mentioned in the Warren Reporter testimony, wasn't mentioned by the FBI. So who did this alleged test? When? Where was it done? Where are the test results? Where are the lab reports? You see, we don't have Jack. We don't have Jack on this, just like with we talked about earlier from that anonymous document. All we have is a single page claiming this. Again, absolute hearsay. And again, claims are not evidence. Everything else is supported by evidence, but those two things are not. Now, this is a color chart that I made of the different colors of the eyewitnesses who saw the Tippit killer's jacket and described it. And this, you know, this goes to show that you know, eyewitnesses sometimes cannot be reliable. We have black all the way to brown, a light blue. It's just insane, this color chart I made. I also made a pie chart of all the Tippit ear witnesses, and this is just nuts. This is insane. I'll try and say this all in one breath. 3 witnesses heard 2 shots. 2 witnesses heard 2 or 3 shots. 5 witnesses heard 3 shots. 2 witnesses heard 3 or 4 shots. 1 witness heard 4 shots. 1 witness heard 4 or 5 shots. 1 witness heard 5 shots. 1 witness heard 6 shots. 3 didn't specify, and 2 couldn't tell. Okay? So it gets crazy with this Tippit case. It really does. Okay. So which leads us to the timing problem. You guys are going to hear some stuff here that might be a little bit new. So let's get right to it. According to the Warren Report, Oswald left his house. He left the depository at 12:33, walked 7 blocks to a bus stop, got on the bus at 12:40, got off the bus at 12:44. And again, this is the Warren Report's timetable. He got into a cab at 12:48, and he got out of the cab in his neighborhood at 12:54, backtracked, walked to his rooming house, and arrived there at exactly, 1 p.m. And that's why everyone says, oh, 1 o'clock, that's when he arrived. Actually, I did some new timetables. So the Warren report said that the walk from the depository to when he got on the bus, those 7 blocks, was 6.5 minutes. Well, I walked it and it was actually 8 minutes and 4 seconds. Okay. So, in fact, nowhere in the Warren report text itself does it say how long it took Oswald to walk from the bus to where he got on in Whaley's cab. But the FBI said it was 3 minutes, and I did it. It took me 3 minutes and 22 seconds. So, okay, that's fine. It's close. From when he got in the cab to when he got out of the cab in Oak Cliff, they say it took him 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Well, it's actually 7 minutes and 37 seconds. You see where this is going, right?
Yeah.
And from when he got out of the cab to when he backtracked to his rooming house, let's say it was 5 minutes and 45 seconds. Now, I walked it in 8 minutes and 9 seconds. Now, I've gotten a lot of kickback over this, but, I can pull up Google Maps and it says it corroborates my walk, 8-minute walk right there. I've had some people say, well, I did it in 6 minutes. But listen, all you have to do is subtract 2 minutes. And it still doesn't work, which you'll see. So I arrived at the rooming house at not 1 o'clock, at 1:04 p.m. Now, we're going to do what the Warren Commission did. They added, to their credit, they added a minute, and I had to figure all this out. The Warren Commission added 1 minute and 53 seconds for a margin of error, because it's not like Oswald walks and he immediately goes on the bus. He immediately goes in the cab. They bumped everything up. So, analyzing everything, the Warren Commission added 1 minute 53 seconds for the margin of errors. So we do what they did, and we arrive at the rooming house at 1:06 p.m. So 1:06 p.m. plus the 3 minutes that the Warren Commission said said that he stayed in his room, changed his clothes, got his gun, plus the several minutes later that his housekeeper saw him at the bus stop after he left. Well, that gets us to the Tippit crime scene at 1:14 p.m. Now, 1:14 p.m., according to Dale Myers, is when Tippit was killed at 1:14. So let's concede that. If this is the case, then therefore Earlene Roberts is apparently Lee Oswald's alibi the moment Tippit is killed. Well, all right, so going east. Let's take the route that the Warren Commission said he did. They said it was a 12-minute walk, but the witnesses actually said that the Tippit killer was walking west. But let's concede let's just say it was 12 minutes. It wasn't, but let's say it was. Let's do what they did. So 1:06 plus 3 minutes plus several minutes later plus a 12-minute walk, Oswald arrives at the crime scene at 1:26 p.m. Again, well, this is just great because Officer Tippit is already en route to the hospital. It doesn't work. All right, well, let's do what the witnesses actually said. They said he was walking west. That wouldn't be a 12-minute walk. That'd be a 16-minute walk. So 1:06 plus the 3 minutes he was in his room, plus the several minutes later he was seen at the bus stop, plus the 16-minute walk the witnesses saw the killer going. That would be 1:30 p.m. So by the time Oswald gets to the crime scene, Tippit is being pronounced dead at Methodist Hospital at 1:30 p.m. That's the time of record. Now, let's be conservative, okay? Maybe we're being a little too hot here. So let's be conservative. Let's remove the margin of error, okay? So that would be not 1:06, that would be 1:04. And again, like I said, so 1:04 plus the 3 minutes he's in his room, plus the several minutes later he was seen at the bus stop, plus the 16-minute walk equals 1:28 p.m. So it still doesn't work. Okay? Let's take the margin of error away and let's go east, as the Warren report claimed. 1:04 plus 3 minutes plus several minutes later plus a 12-minute walk equals 1:24 p.m. So it still doesn't work. Now, Mrs. Roberts, the housekeeper, said she saw him several minutes later outside at the bus stop in front of the house. Several minutes would be about 5 minutes. So a few minutes would be about 2. So, several minutes is what we were doing. 5 minutes, but let's be conservative. Let's change her several minutes, 5 minutes to, let's just say, 2 minutes. So 104 plus 3 minutes is in his room plus 2 minutes plus 12-minute walk equals 1:21 p.m. So it still doesn't work. Okay. Now this is what the Secret Service did. They said from the time Oswald entered the house, went back to his room, changed his clothes, got his gun, left the house, and then Mrs. Roberts eventually looks outside and sees him at the bus stop. They gave all of that 30 seconds. 30 seconds to do all that stuff that was really in the Warner Port's own time. 3 minutes, as we said, 3 minutes in his room, and then go by Mrs. Roberts, 5 minutes. But if we were to scrub our minds, let's just pretend, okay? Let's just scrub our minds or take the brain out of our head. Okay, let's go down this route. 104 plus 30 seconds plus the 12-minute walk equals 1:16 p.m. So Oswald gets there. And again, Officer Tippit is killed at 1:14 according to Dale Meyer. So it still doesn't work. All right. Stick to the facts. Okay. Mrs. Roberts said Oswald entered the house at approximately 1 o'clock. Dale Myers pushes it back to 12:57. Roberts said Oswald was in his room no longer than 4 or 5 minutes. Myers reduces it to 2 minutes. Roberts said she saw Oswald standing at the bus stop, as we said, several minutes later. Myers changes it to moments later. Oswald really would have started walking to 10th and Patton around 1:09 to 1:10 if we go by the Warren Commission's timetable. Myers has morphed it into 12:59. So he's pushed it back 10 minutes. Oswald would have been walking east, but Myers invents a scenario where Oswald walked east and reversed. But that's impossible because 5 witnesses in the neighborhood would have seen the man walk by them twice, which he never did. Let me repeat that. Oswald would have been walking west. Myers invents a scenario where Oswald walked east and reversed. But that's impossible because 5 witnesses in the neighborhood would have seen the man walk by them twice, which he never did. And Myers says that the man then did an about face when he saw Tippit approaching. No witness saw this. So again, folks, just, don't fall for lone nut spin. Just stick to the facts. All right, stick to the facts. Okay. Here's a dumb argument. Some people might say, oh, well, Oswald was a fit Marine. He's a fit Marine. He could make it in no time. Well, I mean, that argument is just outrageous and reduces the evidence to literally nothing. It just outright and blatantly ignores the evidence, which has Oswald being seen several minutes after 1:03. That would be, 1:08. And, Tippit is killed at 1:14. So, therefore it's impossible for Oswald to have walked or jogged there. Okay. So Joseph McBride says, quote, while it is unlikely that Oswald was even at the scene of the crime, it's not impossible. But if he was, he had to have been driven there. And that in and of itself would tend to be evidence of some kind of conspiracy. Okay, so with this case that I've laid out, this presentation I've laid out, either one or two things happen. It really boils down to these two things. One, Oswald was driven there, and somehow all of the evidence magically points away from him. Or two, Oswald didn't do it, and somebody else shot Tippit. Okay? Those are really our two options. And it's important for me to state that my conclusion is not Oswald didn't kill Tippit. My conclusion is that the official story hasn't met its burden of proof. However, these are the fingerprints that were lifted from Tippit's patrol car, and they do not match Oswald. As a matter of fact, we have 3 witnesses, Benavides, Markham, and James Archer, who said that they all saw the killer lean over and touch Tippit's patrol car in some way, and fingerprints were lifted, and they do not match Oswald. So is Lee Oswald apparently exonerated? Maybe. And very interestingly, you'll notice those Benavides and Helen Markham said that when the man was leaning over to talk to Tippit through his open vent window, something was said between Tippit and the man on the sidewalk, and that the killer suddenly took 2 quick steps back up onto the sidewalk. Now, if you're leaning over, touching the patrol car, and you jump back, your hands will smear. And damn, look at what we have right here. We have a smear right here. You see right here. There you go. We have a smear right here. And like I said, those fingerprints are not Oswald's. So that's just something to think about if someone were to say, well, they could be anyone's prints. We don't know, you know. This is the lead detective. We're closing out here in just a second. Lead detective Jim Ovell told Gary Fannin in 1988 Oswald would have never been found guilty of killing Tippit or JFK at the time of his death. And we don't have time to get into this, but if you want to ask me about it in the Q&A, there's also a mysterious wallet that turned up at the scene. That's a conundrum. So the next question is, where did the real killer go? Well, a woman named Mrs. Slatter saw the killer ditch his jacket in the alley. Interestingly, 2 women found the jacket in the alley and hung it up on a fence post. We have an informant by the name of H2 who said, quote, the assailant ran westward down the alley, turned right at Crawford, ducked into the hospital area of the Abundant Life Annex, hid there for a while, and then made his way to the 2nd floor of the Annex building. By this time, his pursuers had passed. The assailant climbed out of a second floor window at the southeast corner of the building, jumped to the ground, the 2nd floor is quite low, and continued across Crawford and down the alley westward. So that's where the real killer went. Another question is, was Tippit involved? Here he is right here. I have to concur with the late Larry Ray Harris and researcher Greg Lowery. They studied Tippit the most out of anyone who's ever lived. They've studied Tippit the most, and both of them came to their independent conclusions that Tippit was not involved in the plot to kill Kennedy. And this is what Larry Harris said. He said, quote, I was never able to link Tippit to any plot or conspiracy. I feel like I know this guy. I have a feel for who he was, and he would not wittingly or knowingly have participated in a plot or a conspiracy. It was totally out of character for Tippit. Tippit was just a good old East Texas farm boy. He'd been on the force for 11 years without promotion, no hope of getting promoted. He was a very simple, down-to-earth guy. His main interests were fishing and hunting and playing dominoes and that kind of thing. There was nothing complex about Tippit other than the fact that he had marital problems. So, in closing, I just want to read something by the late Larry Ray Harris, who I wish was still with us and who should be giving this presentation and not me. This is how Larry Harris ended his Ask Conference presentation. Quote, this is Larry Harris speaking, quote, I think that anyone who studies the evidence objectively and in its entirety will come away disturbed by what they find, because there's a lot of indications that Oswald was not the Tippit killer, that he was nowhere near there. In closing, it's unfortunate that the Tippit murder has been virtually regulated to footnote status in history. And it's ironic because it was the Tippit murder which went a long way in persuading the public that, Oswald killed the policeman and therefore probably killed President Kennedy. Because the Tippit murder at that time and even now is depicted as virtually an open and shut case against Oswald. But I think if you'll read up and study the record, you'll find that the Warren Commission findings leave a lot to be desired, and there's a lot about the Tippit murder that we don't know. It seems at this late date, we may never be able to resolve the Tippit murder. It seems, at this point at least, that it seems destined to remain the other unsolved murder on November 22nd, 1963. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, Matt, we've got a pretty short turnaround before the Grodens appear. We've got about 5 minutes we could probably squeeze in terms of Q&A.
Sure.
Does anybody have a question to start? Yeah, so Scott Reeder's got a question.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks. That was great. Enjoyed that presentation very much. I just want to get your view on a couple of things. First, the Davis sisters.
Yeah.
Did they say that when they saw the Tippit's vehicle, something along the lines of that it was parked outside where he was living, indicating that Tippit had been in that, where he parked the car that had been there before, and also about a police car that was seen down the lane that then disappeared.
Yeah, so that's one of the other problems. There are quite a handful of Tippit witnesses who saw Tippit in that area. Mrs. Clemens, the Davis sisters, as you said, or one of them, Mrs. and Scoggins. They all said, they recognized Tippit in that area. So that's a problem. We don't really know why, and that was not his usual district. So in regards to the alleged police car in the alleyway, that's actually been proven to not have been possible, because if you look at the crime scene photos, it's not really an alley in between those two houses, and there are structures in between those houses. So I should have put a picture here, but it's not possible to fit a car there, much less fit a car in there and backtrack and drive away. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Mike Phillips has got a question, Matt.
Hi, Matt. Just a quick one. I agree with you about the timings that just don't work out. We had to go walking the route, didn't we?
Could you speak up a little bit? I'm so sorry.
Mike was saying that he agreed with you with respect to the timings, and I mean we did a test run a couple of years ago where we walked beyond the Tippit murder scene further east to where the knife scuffle incident kind of happened, just east of Marsalis, and just walking back from there took another 4 or 5 minutes. So, if there was, to underline your point, if there was a circuitous route and he did come from the east walking west, I mean, there's absolutely no way he gets back to the actual point where he was, slain.
Yeah, Neil. Just the question I had is, it wouldn't affect the timing. It would still be wrong. There wouldn't be enough time for him to get there. But didn't Mrs. Roberts say that she noticed the time being just after 1 o'clock when he left? Because
yes,
when the news when it was reported on the news,
exactly,
it still wouldn't screw up the timeline that you suggested, but it might be slightly earlier than when he arrived there.
Yeah. So that actually aligns with my timeline, because, as I said, I arrived at the rooming house between 1:04 and 1:06, and in Mrs. Roberts' testimony, she said it was around 1 o'clock, or maybe just after that. So just after that is, 104, 106. So that seems pretty close. That matches up pretty close.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question on behalf of Nancy?
Sure.
How many wallets at the scene and on Oswald at arrest?
How much time you got?
Yeah.
How much time? How much time we got? Well, long story short, I'm trying to be very, very quick about this. A wallet appeared at the scene, and it was delivered to the scene, and unidentified civilians handed it over to Sergeant Kenneth Croy and said, "Here you go." The killer threw it down. Well, that didn't happen because one, who throws what murderer leaves behind their wallet, and none of the witnesses saw saw a wallet being thrown down. So someone delivered that wallet to the crime scene, handed it to Sergeant Croy, and then disappeared.
Yeah, exactly.
So ultimately, Oswald had like 4 wallets. He had about 4 wallets. I mean, is there anybody in the audience who has more than one wallet? Who has 4 wallets?
Well, Paul Blow's here with us, as Matt, and he can
Paul.
actually trump you on that. He's got the wallets up to 6 at the moment.
That's great. Paul has.
Yeah.
It's good to
I'm
see you,
going to
Paul.
have to, Matt. We're so short of time. I'm going to ask. I'm going to allow one more question from Mike Dworetsky.
When I was reading up on this case long ago, I noticed that Helen Markham described the time of the shooting as about 107 or late 108, because she was on her way to a bus to go to her job, and she looked at the clock on the wall.
Yeah.
And that's what it said was when she was about to leave out the door. So that puts the timeline on a great strain. And then there was another man whose name I can't recall at the moment, who drove up to the scene, saw the policemen on the ground, people gathering. He had his daughter with him. He said, "Stay in the car." He looked at his watch, and I think it was 1:10.
It was, yeah. It's Bowley.
Bowley.
Yeah.
Bowley.
Yeah.
And
All right. Yeah. So someone's clock has to be off a little bit, because if the shooting really happened as early as like 106, and that means that Tippit was laying in the street for 13 minutes, and that did not happen. I would say it was about 5 minutes he laid in the street. So it definitely wasn't 13 minutes. So again, someone's clock has to be wrong. But what I was doing in this presentation was conceding what the data that the Warren Commission had, and that still doesn't work. It could have been earlier. Something in my gut, after all my data says it was made, the time of the shooting was probably around 111, but between 111 to basically it was between 109 to 114.
All right,
is essentially the time that my best guess on when it happened.
That's reasonable. All right, guys, we're going to have to conclude this. Matt, that was great. Thank you very much. There's a lot of work you put in there.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
And yeah, best of luck. Look forward to seeing you in the future.
All right.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you very much.